بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الجليل الكريم المؤمن الأكيد الجمال الأعلى الحفيظ الصمد الولي الوهاب الغفور الودود الحق السلام. Today I'm going to try and keep it shorter and deliver a bit of a vaccine injection of speech on the concept of femininity and the divine theologies throughout history and how this synthesizes in Islam, inshallah. So, when we look back into the Ugaritic texts that predate the Hebrew Bible, and you can see a remnant of this Ugaritic theology and pantheon in Deuteronomy, I believe it's 32, where you can see they're making a transition from putting things on El Elyon, the Most High, so Rabbi Allah, if you will, as people often say in Sujud during Salah, and as in the Quran. So El Elyon is the Most High. He's definitionally above all the other divine entities, and then each nation gets a deity. And Yahweh was the deity of the Judean hinterlands. And his brother Baal, which means Lord, was a bit more hardcore storm deity of the coastal regions, where there was often tribal conflict. This is documented with the clashes with the Phoenicians and the Philistine Canaanites and so on. And then there was Asherah, and Asherah was originally the consort of El Elyon, and then in this revised henotheistic pantheon centered around Yahweh, became the consort of Yahweh. And there were trees planted in her honor. And this is documented in the Hebrew Bible with the stories of Suleiman alayhi salam marrying women from nearby tribes and bringing in these additional entities. So Baal is usually associated with basically with Satan and with human sacrifice and barbarity. And this is what Christians believe Muslims worship. And the the problem is they're wrong, but they're also in some cases they are right, because the Quraysh did have an idol of Hubal in their Kaaba, and the Athari Muslims. So you have Quranists who interpret the Quran with the flat Earth and the literal hands and face. So this in and of itself is reasonable room for interpretation, and this is why the Sunni ecumenical Big Ten includes Athari and Ashari, which is more, and Maturidi, which are more abstract and influenced by Platonism, and the Athari is old school. But what the Athari does is through hadiths includes the two right hands and the single leg that covers the top of hell, whereas in the Quran it's 19 angels, the infamous Code 19. And you end up with a concept of the god as a huge monster that looks a lot like the Hubal idol. And it's not great. So, and we know that there's a lot of satanic influence in Islam. So the Christians are half right about that, but it's a bit of the pot calling the kettle black, since the Christian empires also practiced horrible executions, slavery, etc., etc. So amidst all of these patriarchal dominance culture religions, you have this yearning for that women have, as I mentioned in the feminism talk, to find this divine feminine, and you have singers who are doing rituals to Athena and Artemis. So Athena represents wisdom, is what Athens was named after, and in a sense is the mascot of Western scientific, rationalist culture in a sense. And then Artemis is this more of a girl boss huntress who goes out and she's like a tomboy in a sense. These are all normative terminologies. So this has always been something that people have desired, is this balance in archetypes in their theological concepts, whether they were polytheistic or henletheistic, such as Ashura being subservient in a somewhat patriarchal way to Yahweh in the intermediate period of the evolution of Judaism, or with the Yahwist revisions that ended up becoming codified after the Babylonian exile and Cyrus the Great, the first, not maybe the first, but a notable Messiah named and alluded to in Isaiah, not the prophetic Messiah, but a Messiah who delivered the Jews, and then they codified this um, strict Torah observance. We would have to believe, following the Quran again, that this was not an invention, but rather almost like Salafism in the post-Babylonian exile period, and that it took a few centuries to take widespread adoption, from what the Elephantine Papyri suggests to us, based on a Jewish community in on an island on the Nile who were somewhat removed geographically from that, but also that the general archaeological evidence suggests that it wasn't until the second century AD that we had widespread strict Torah observance in the Levant. So for people who don't have faith, they take that as enough evidence to do away with the Old Testament, with the Tanakh entirely. But for those of us who, this is what's funny, is you'll have these debates between Christians and Muslims about the Quran versus the Bible and which is more authentic. But truly, the Quran gives you a skeleton of spinal. It's like somebody has survived a car accident and they've had bones put together with metal, and the Quran is that metal, and the bone is the Bible. So it's mercy for those who wish to believe in the Bible. If we only could improve our dialogue. Moving on, um, Ashura became tucked away, and yet in the Jewish tradition we have the contemplations of this problem that Plato also hit on, the one and the many, and the transcendent perfect God versus his agentic successors. And when I say his, I don't really mean his, I just mean is. take the take the H off. And so you have like the ascension of Enoch and the Metatron, and this guy went on an astral projection trip into the third heaven and saw on the throne of God this angel doing accounting, and had a panic and became a heretic. And so Christians will cite that as evidence that they're somewhat based in their monotheism slash composite personality monotheism, and rather than a Yashid or Wahid monotheism. And so we get Christianity with the Holy Spirit as what would effectively serve the role as what Ashura represented, as this wisdom infusion that is subtle and tender. And we also have Mary. So Christians will point out, oh, the Muhammad alayhi salam, they don't say alayhi salam. they don't wish him peace. Didn't understand the Trinity, as you can see in this verse in Maida. Why did you tell people to worship you and your mother? And that's presumed to be the Trinity, but really the Trinity is addressed in other verses. And you can see why people would venerate and send effectively salawat on Mary alayhi salam so much, is because they latch on to this personality of a loving mother. And it also, if you follow any feminist theory, it redefines the feminine into something that is distinctly feminine but is unthreatening in terms of sexual agency, right? Thus we get Mary as the perpetual virgin. Mary as the perpetual virgin also has the effect of erasing James as-Sadiq, the brother of Jesus, the Muslim, if you will, the God submitting, Torah observant, true first pope, who was founding and leading. Well, I wasn't founding, but he was the successor, the first appointed successor, leading the true Christianity, and who, perhaps it seems, between accounts in the Pauline letters and in Acts, which is probably very late, that he also authorized that non-Jews could be Christians and follow Noahide laws, where this is where you get Christians drinking and eating pork and all this stuff. And so in the Middle Ages, you had the Black Madonna, which was a version of Mary who was more ethnically accurate and darker skinned. And there's talk that she was a recapitulation of Isis. And indeed, Asherah and Ishtar are basically linguistic cognates. So you have this current of a mother, wife, divine matron figure that runs through. And the popularity of this is, it seems like it's built into the fitra to want this kind of figure in your identification of divinity in the mix, not as the feminist thing of like, we're going to worship Hecate, we're going to worship Athena. This is reactionary. We're going to completely override the patriarchal with just the matriarchal. But clearly, people have desired to have both in their conceptuality. And in the tradition of Zoroastrianism, before all this, we have the Amesh Spenta. So the Zoroastrians dealt with this problem of one in many through the Yazidis, not to be confused with Yazid, the son of Muawiyah, who sacked Medina and is widely considered between Sunni and Shia to be one of the most evil leaders in history, at least since the revelation of Quran. He's a pharaoh level, evildoer. And but why that name? And so the brother, well, he's a very ardent ex-Muslim, but inshallah he'll find an esoteric renewed faith sometime later in life. The fellow at Gnostic Quran is a big fan of the theory based on coinage, which is a considerable point of evidence that Yazid was actually Persian, coming from this etymology of Yazadas, which means those deserving worship, or perhaps the way that Sunnis and send salawat on Muhammad alayhi salam, or how Shia might dip into a little halul over Ali alayhi salam, rather than assigning them as prime divinities. And among the Azadas was this feminine figure, the Amesh Spenta, which is this sort of Mother Mary type spirit of wisdom. Likewise, in Gnosticism, we have the Sophia as the 10th emanation in this Neoplatonic dissension from the unknowable one, who made the mistake of creating this narcissist creator entity, Yaldabaoth, who there are many Gnostics, but some Gnostics assigned him to be the deity in the Torah, and operating out of ignorance about his supremacy. And when you consider how Yahweh was originally the son of El, there's an interesting analogy to them. And I want to be very clear that when we're worshiping Allah based on the guidance of the Quran and without falling into the trap of literalism about God's attributes, and you align yourself on something close to Mutazili Akida, whether it's Ash'arism or Ibn Arabi revised Mutazilism, or Ismaili Neoplatonism, or what have you, as long as it's not authorism. And I want to be gracious to the Quranist brothers and sisters who do read hands and face without tawil, and not lump them in with the Hanbali Salafi authors. What we're worshiping is essentially El Elyon, not in the sense of an old guy from pre-Sumerian mythology, from Akkadian, Ugaritic era mythology, but the Most High. So something in between that and the Platonic monad. What is definitionally fundamental and ontological, and above all, any sense of emanation, whether those are true or not. I mean, Mutazilism does not really believe in that either, right? So it sidesteps the critiques of emanations. So we have Sophia, we have in the Kabbalah, which the dating of the Zohar. I believe the Kabbalah is really not, the Zohar is not really that novel, but I need to read it and give it a closer look. But from listening to the brother, and I consider him an honorary Muslim from the Seekers of Unity. He doesn't seem to be pro genocide, and he's an observant Jew in Tawhid who practices mysticism. From his discussions of Zohar, it seems like um, they're basically recapitulating Neoplatonism or Middle Platonism and Gnostic emanation theory of how you go from transcendent to immanent, with the 10 Sephiroth instead of the 10 intellects. And the Shekinah from the Chokmah, so the Chokmah would be like your logos or your first intellect, the spirit of the masculine prophets like Jesus alayhi salam or Muhammad alayhi salam, etc. And then the Shekinah, which, so Chokmah represents knowledge, Shekinah represents understanding or wisdom. So there's something more empathetic to this concept of understanding to distinguish it from wisdom. And then we have there were folk Catholic traditions about Joan of Arc being a daughter of God, and the Holy Spirit is female and represents this feminine energy. And they try to, no, it's male because Jesus was male, and etc. Okay. So why is this, and what is the correct approach? So it's clear that if you were to literally say there are distinct ontological realities which have gender, um, that are uncreated, then that would be polytheistic. That would be shirk. Whereas if you think, well, there are these emanations of God, so the universal soul is feminine and the first intellect is masculine, they're both created, that might be fine, I suppose. You're staying on the side of the supremacy of the one. You're staying within Tawheed, inshallah. Allahu Alam. But for the Mutazili tradition, since we believe in the unity of the essence and the attributes, this curvature of God's justice and God's loving mercy and forgiveness and wisdom and strength and punishments and elevations and debasements and the interactivity of Qadr is fundamental to reality, it's ontological, then this wisdom, which we see traditionally associated with femininity, due to the softness that it can entail, because it moderates punishments, it sees room for mercy where strict readings do not, among other things. It allows us to do deeper esoteric readings of scripture and come away with more profound lessons about how to be wiser, not just more knowledgeable, but wiser. And what is wisdom? Wisdom is the integration of information into a goal orientation. So I'm almost 40 years old, and I've been born with the gifts of intelligence, and I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and I ramble on about it on this channel. But only now am I coming to appreciate just how stupid I really am. And maybe that is wisdom. And there's a humility coupled with strength where you integrate the intelligence, and that is the wisdom. Among other ways you can talk about wisdom, but ultimately, wisdom means you're going to put these gifts of knowledge and intelligence and whatever resources that enables you to manipulate into good use for the purposes of God, inshallah, and in the name of God. And from the Injil integration, this means extending overall the amounts of mercy and forgiving other people their faults so that they may be forgiving, so that Allah may forgive them. For Allah lives in the heart of the believer, from Sahih Hadith and for what that's worth, and from Gospel. On Judgment Day, Allah will ask us, why didn't you feed me? Why didn't you clothe me when I was naked? And he said, what are you talking about? You're this transcendent. Oh, you were in the homeless guy. Oh man, I should have given money to the homeless guy. I was in that tenderness, that kindness in the heart, like Guru Nanak said to his Muslim lutist. Obviously, he wasn't a Salafi because he was a musician. That when you aren't praying your Salah, where does it go? It goes into the heart of the believer. MashaAllah. Ya Rahman. And when we talk about Kitab and Hikmah, the book and the wisdom, and people say, well, the wisdom is in the Hadith. And the thing is, the Sunnis, just sort of like, in the converse way, like how the Christians aren't fully wrong saying that Muslims worship Hubal or Satan, because some Muslims really do. The Sunnis aren't totally wrong to say that there's hikmah in the Hadith, but the thing is, the Hadith recapitulates a lot of these older things, including from the Injil, and this general sense of mercy, but they're mixed in with all kinds of things that are corrupt and that invite fiqh and sharia that is against the Quran and is therefore shirk, as well as being oppression and various absurdities. So it's a huge cluster. They didn't do a great job of filtering. So part of the difference between Mutaziliya and Quraniyun, in a strict Quran-only sense, is applying a filter. And the Abadis do this, but they don't do a great job. They keep in some of these horrible chestnuts, despite filtering from 7,000 Sahih Hadiths to 1,000. So with the Mutazili tradition, we would apply our intellect and our wisdom. And how you apply the intellect depends on what wisdom you have to read the Quran and know what is against the Quran, to apply a more refined matan analysis in rejecting hadith. Because if you think the Quran supports slavery, then or abuse of concubines and captive women, then you'll read the hadith about that and you'll say, no, this is probably legitimate tafsir, but it's satanic. But you have to, it's a chicken and egg thing. What is Hassan depends on what you believe is good. And so, with the wisdom that we've been able to digest through analyzing these traditions with our intellect, we can then appreciate the beauty of the Quran and how its so called progressive interpretation has indeed progressed, reflects the progress of history, and how this is not some Western pipe dream to get rid of slavery. This was actually the trajectory hermeneutic of Quran 90, rather than saying, no, we need to have slavery always so people can continue to get hasanat from freeing slaves. We need to make sure we keep having slavery. This is what an Abadi brother actually said to me in regards to that. So this is what you get when you don't have the wisdom. Not to backbite the brother, may Allah guide him. This is very important. And so when we think about women as being essentially low-key enslaved in marriage and a sort of gender apartheid under stricter interpretations of Sharia, such as with the Taliban or how the Houthis are doing things, versus it seems like Iran is backing off from brutalizing women in public displays of unrest as a punitive measure to enforce compulsion in the deen. And it seems like within their usul and their democratic mechanism and the public demands, and frankly, they've got much bigger fish to fry, such as going to war with the whole world, right? Maybe, with Israel and the West, inshallah, things stay stable for a while. We get to keep doing good works in the dunya, and they don't escalate too rapidly. But Iran seems to, I don't want to speak too soon, but they seem to be backing off from being violent about enforcing strict hijab measures. You see a lot of women in Iran these days, they just choose not to wear it. And if it's a sin, then it's their sin to incur, and it can be perhaps balanced by their good deeds, inshallah. And this is the wisdom that God is just in a way that will blow your mind. As the Quran says, we are obligated to be merciful. And who obligates God? God obligates itself. And this is the way things are. And when you appreciate the form, the theophany of God, not as a woman or as a big bearded fellow or as even a giant golden peacock dragon or something, like the way you might imagine Jibril alayhi salam and from that hadith where he stretches over the horizon in a vision. God is this algorithmic curvature, and there's reflexivity to why the way things are the way things are. And inshallah, we will be on the right side of Judgment Day, and we will see that many people who we would have feared for their damnation will be in Al-Araf, and they will eventually enter Jannah, and perhaps other people will be in hellfire of a limited severity and annihilated after some modest amount of time. Perhaps some mere years of suffering for having wasted their life but not been terribly evil. And other nuances and forgivenesses and so on, and that we will find all sorts of people in Jannah because they were truly submitting to God and obeying God, even if they were on the wrong side of various theological and fiqh debates. And it will shock you how much God is merciful and just and wise. And in that, you will appreciate the synthesis of what we have been primitively calling the divine masculine and the divine feminine.